President's address this afternoon, it's very important to outright state that the Democratic Alliance is firmly committed to the provisions of the Constitution under Section 25. And we are firmly committed to achieving universal health care as the rest of the world is aiming to do. However, there's been deliberate misinformation about what this bill seeks to do and what this bill will be able to do. This bill in its current form will not be able to bring about quality healthcare for all South Africans. It is a lie that has been peddled, and it is simply not true. As the bill stands, all that it will be able to do is to pool funds of about 300 billion rand a year to be able to set up the NHI fund, but it's not going to deal with the systemic issues which are there in the healthcare system. The healthcare system needs significant investment, which has not been done in 30 years. The healthcare system needs to be capacitated. Vacancies need to be filled. None of these things have been done. And if you're going to seek to achieve universal health care, you're going to first have to fix those problems, and then you're going to about a funding model that we can then talk about. But what this government has done is essentially has tried to put a band-aid over a gashing wound, and the gashing wound being the healthcare system. And so we are very clear that South Africa spends a significant amount of money, of its GDP, share of its GDP in healthcare provision, but we are not seeing those results. Way too many people are giving birth on hospital floors. Way too many people are dying in the public health care system. And that needs to be fixed. But this stroke of a pen and this ceremony and pomp and ceremony that has been done here today is not going to fix that. It's not going to immediately go to the people of KwaPata in the Eastern Cape who are still seen in mud huts. It's not going to invest in the kind of hospital infrastructure that we need. The second issue that we have a problem with is the pilot projects that were done at the cost of millions of rands. Those pilot projects were done and none of them were successful. Absolutely none of the pilot successful, and part of the reason why the pilot projects were not successful was because government failed to pay general practitioners which they had hired to be able to essentially roll out a service. Government is unable to pay any service provider within the 30 days that it sets for itself, and it wasn't able to do so even when it was doing the pilot project. So it makes absolutely no sense for you to do a pilot project on a limited scale and then simply then say we are going to roll this out on a national scale. The third element that we're opposed to is how this will be funded. The president went on and on about how it has to be done, and of course universal health care and the provision of quality health care has to be provided, whether or not it means we've got to move money around. But the funding of this is problematic because you are centralizing an NHI fund of 300 billion, essentially creating the biggest state-owned enterprise we've ever seen. South Africa does not have a good history with SOEs, and we are convinced that having this NHI fund will lead to mass looting of this kind of money. But instead of essentially an ESCOM crisis, what we're going to have is people who are going to be dying because of this kind of looting that we are likely going to see. And so my colleague is going to talk about what are some of the themes that we have seen around the healthcare system. But lastly, around the funding aspect, the other issue is, of course, the additional tax burden that it will have to be implemented and the additional tax burden that will be essentially given on South Africans. There's absolutely no way that government can fund this kind of extravagant 300 billion rand a year unless we start to see the increase in margins of tax. And we are saying that there's a shrinking tax base in South Africa. The Quarter Labour Survey yesterday even confirmed that more and more people are joining the unemployment queue. 30 million people in South Africa are living in poverty. Where are you going to find the kind of tax base that you need where you're going to have this kind of additional tax that is going to be implemented on people? Jack, if you can briefly talk about the weaknesses in the system, and Michelle, if you can talk about the parliamentary process, and I'll speak to the legal challenge that we're going to launch.
Yep. I'm going to take Gauteng as a case study for what should be the jewel of a health system in the whole of Africa. We've got all the resources, magnificent universities, we've got 4 academic hospitals, more than any other province, and yet we have a very poor standard of care, and scandal after scandal after scandal. And just when it comes to infrastructure, because I don't think of all 37 hospitals in Gauteng, not a single one will meet the standards for the NHI. And in fact, not a single one of our 37 hospitals complies with the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Can you believe that? That doesn't comply with government legislation for health and safety. And of course, to be a patient at a Gauteng hospital is to encounter long queues, mismanagement, long waiting lists for surgery, and scandal after scandal. Just to take, during the COVID epidemic, 2 billion rand was made available to assist with this terrible epidemic, and it was largely squandered. 500 million rand went on the Anglo-Ashanti Hospital, which is abandoned. There were wards that were built that were never finished. SIU is just investigating what went wrong with all this money. And then, of course, the scandal at Tembisa Hospital, 1 billion rand of mismanaged funds, according to the SIU, and the whistleblower Babita Deokaran was assassinated for trying to uncover it. So this is what you have in our largest health system in South Africa, provincial health system, and it's just a model for what's going to happen if you have hundreds of millions, according to an NHI fund, and just going to be seen as just an opportunity for extra mismanagement and looting, when there is an alternative. You need to fix up public hospitals first, the public health system, and the Western Cape every year, the Western Cape health system gets a clean audit. Compare that to Gauteng, which gets a terrible audit every year, and they never seem to improve. So I think, on the one hand, you've got the DA vision for what can be done in the one province that we control. On the other hand, we have an electioneering stunt that's going to cause a lot of damage, because doctors are scared and they're going to emigrate. And if they ever do implement this, it's going to be an absolute disaster on an Eskom scale. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all the media. I would like to speak about the parliamentary process. So this bill has been in the making for the past 7 years, and all the public participation around this bill has taken place. So last year, when we went through the bill clause by clause, and when we finished up with all the recommendations we made from every political party, the DA made significant input towards that bill clause by clause. Not one of our recommendations were taken into account. The Parliamentary Legal Advisory Team made significant recommendations. They did not use any of those recommendations. We had many health experts, medical aides, professionals come and present to the committee, and not one of those recommendations were taken into account. So, in my view, the public participation was completely flawed in terms of this bill. You will recall that the day the bill went to the NCOP, the sitting was stopped that day because, many people were contacting the president personally to say, our recommendations weren't even taken into account, and that sitting was cancelled that day and then proceeded the next day. Just to say that the Democratic Alliance I myself had written to the president and asked him to send this bill back to Parliament so that we could debate these recommendations. And I got a very wishy-washy answer from the president's office. It said to me that the DA was part of the participation in the committee, and therefore we had ample time to make recommendations. which was never ever taken into account. So I believe, and the Democratic Alliance believes, that the public participation was completely flawed. We handed in a minority report as well in terms of this matter, and the ANC have just simply ignored it and ignored everybody that came to take time to put in some recommendations in terms of that bill. Thank you.
So lastly, colleagues, now where to from now? The reality now is that the president has now signed the bill, and we have 30 days in accordance to the law to file our legal challenge against the bill. The Democratic Alliance's constitutional concerns are as follows. We believe that the centralization of the pool of funds to manage an NHI fund that will be managed by a minister will not only hinder the ability of people to be able to access healthcare in terms of Section 27, but also will open up the fund to significant corruption. We've seen with Digital Vibes and the former Minister of Health and what happened there, and we're of the belief that we can make this plea to the court that, one, the department is not going to be able to implement the progressive realization of quality health care to South Africans if this bill comes into enactment. Section 27 will not be realized under this current bill, and that we will make the case that this fund will, with the unfettered powers that the minister has, actually be looted, and ultimately what we will have is a scenario where we still are unable to essentially realize the quality health care. And so in summary, what we are doing, we are currently now putting together our papers. Our lawyers have been briefed, and of course we knew, as Michelle says, we knew that despite the inputs that were made by academics, by industry experts, by business, by academics, by political parties, we knew that the ANC would ram this bill through the parliament. And so, as has become customary, it is now up to us to effectively approach the court to say this bill will in effect be the one thing that will stop people from being able to access quality healthcare in its entirety. The kind of poor healthcare services that we are seeing in South Africa is only going to worsen, and we will be making that case in our court papers, and we will be essentially advising when we will be able to hand those in. We will also be relying on the flawed process, the parliamentary process that was followed, and we will also be looking at all the legislatures and how that was done in the various provinces. This is important because you will recall there was a bill regarding Khoisan leadership that was sent back by the court to Parliament on the basis of a flawed public participation process. So we are looking both at the substantive challenge legally of this bill, but also we are looking at it from a process point of view. And so that is where we are. Our lawyers are in the process of putting together these papers and will be essentially filing them. I'm happy to take questions. Yes, sir.
My name is Mama from the Middle Look, it sounds to me that DA is preempting what is going to happen. There's an argument that now with the NHI delay, hospitals, government hospitals are going to be the big league. And then there's an argument that those who want to, I mean, when people are sick, everyone is sick. They don't need to be others who get better services because they can pay for it. What is wrong with this bill? Except for you saying that but the process was flawed. What is wrong with this bill? Because I don't think you're saying what is wrong. You're just saying the processes are flawed and they're going to be routine. Is the DA against NHI because of how it's going to work, or you are preempting that there's going to be corruption and people are going to steal from it? That's why you don't necessarily want it to work. So I just want to maybe if you can clarify that. And medical, I feel that, I mean, people when they are sick, they should be given the same treatment. It does not mean that because you can afford medical aid, others who can't, they should be subjected to treatment that is not in.
Yeah.
So maybe just clarify that.
I really really want to clarify this in particular because it is one of the arguments that have been advanced. I've seen clips of the Premier Panyaza Lusufi telling people that they're going to be able to hospitals and private hospitals and the like and get the same kind of treatment. Number one, there's absolutely nothing wrong in saying we want universal health care. Universal health care is where the majority of your citizens are able to access quality health care services. It is wrong, Lunga, that there are people who are not getting good quality health care when they go to Baragwanath Hospital. It is wrong that babies are dying at Tembisa Hospital. But that omission has been the fault of government. Up until now, it has been the fault of government. Yes, a two-tier system is not one that we want. However, what we are saying is that if you are going to fix the healthcare system, you are going to have to first talk about how do you invest in Tembisa Hospital so that you can make sure that the infrastructure problems there are resolved, that you can make sure that you've got doctors that are employed. Just now we had doctors who were protesting who were saying they could not be placed in hospitals. There are glaring systemic problems in the healthcare system in South Africa that are not being dealt with. And what we are against is using a bill and saying to people, by signing this bill, all those problems are going to go away. They are not going to go away. You are not going to immediately and magically get better services from healthcare, from state hospitals, unless government takes a point of making sure that they commit themselves to Section 27 of the Constitution and fix what is broken. That is more difficult to the ANC government than actually admitting that we have failed the people of South Africa for the past 30 years. We have not kept up with the needs of people in terms of the public healthcare system. And now what we're doing, we're scapegoating and we're saying the 15% of people who are getting better healthcare because they are paying for it are the problem. That's not the problem. The problem here is that you have not been able to keep the quality of care at the level at which it shouldn't matter whether you go to a Mediclinic or you go to Baragwanath Hospital. But that is government's responsibility. It is not the private sector's responsibility to make sure that they either lower their standard or up their standard to suit your needs as government. As government, you have a constitutional obligation to make sure that wherever people go to access healthcare, they have quality healthcare. So to answer your question, we're not against quality healthcare, particularly for poor black South Africans. We're not against universal healthcare at all. That's where the rest of the globe is going. What we are saying is that this bill is being touted as the silver bullet, which is not going to achieve those things. I hope that clarifies that NHI is not universal health care, and we must make that distinction. Getting quality healthcare services does not mean we have to adopt NHI. The two are not mutually inclusive. The bill in itself is flawed as it stands. If the president were to send back this bill, we were able to make amendments that literally the entire industry wanted to make, we would support a bill that would seek to equalize access to quality health care. That's not the problem. The problem is lying about the bill and saying it's going to do something that it will not do. I hope that clarifies.
It's Natasha Green from SABC. So, Dr. Joe Pata basically says that you are protecting, the reason why you're against the NHI, you've got vested interests and you're protecting the interests of capital. Furthermore, you speak about a flawed process. Earlier on, Dr. Domo had said that there was nothing flawed about this process in terms of consulting with people. It received 118 submissions despite a public hearing.
Yeah. So I think I want to stop because I think it leads to Lunga's question. If I can put the DA's objection to the NHI in one single sentence, it is simply this. The public healthcare system in South Africa is broken, and to fix it, you've got to do the hard work. You can't implement populist legislation and pretend that you can, one, afford to implement it, two, that it will fix what is broken. So we are not protecting the interests of anyone except the interests of South Africans who rely on the state. Over 80% of South Africans rely on state care, on public health care services. Of course, you want to make sure that those are the people that you look after the most, but you're not doing that. And this bill is not going to do that. Instead, it's going to collect further. That's our concern. Our concern are the people of South Africa who are going to be plunged into a crisis when this bill bombs and when essentially money is stolen. So to Lunga's point, we're not preempting anything. It's hard for us to be optimistic about a 300 billion rand fund when we've seen literally every single state-owned enterprise end up where looting has happened. It would almost be naive to think that the reason why also at essentially Lunga, we are saying that part of also the problem is that this fund is only going to be managed by a minister and his appointed board. There's no parliamentary oversight. There are no good governance principles that will look after this fund. It's got the makings of essentially a looting spree. So that's the concern that the DA has. I think you may have a two-finger.
I'm just interested, you've spoken about the public sector and how it needs to be fixed. You don't seem to have much concern in terms of the private sector. When we've heard of the fact that a lot of medical aid companies are actually overcharging and literally kind of looting ordinary South Africans of their hard-earned money. Why are you not saying anything about that? That's the first thing. The second thing is, the President talks about social solidarity as being all in the same boat as South Africans, rich, white, poor, and this is what this is supposed to do, to bring about some kind of equality. Are you suggesting as the DA that that your constituency and the people who you serve are basically people to be protected and everybody else must just see what to do with themselves?
Firstly, I think the people that we are seeking to protect in South Africa are the 60 million South African citizens. We are a political party that sees itself as a representative of the people and not a particular constituency. So no, I disagree. And again, to answer the point that I made earlier, that this bill, the president talks about social solidarity. He talks about we should all be on the same boat. But essentially, if you've got a flawed piece of legislation before his desk and he signs it, and none of it is going to achieve what we all want, which is to see the millions of poor black people who are subject to second-class healthcare services, it's not going to happen. It's essentially an electioneering tool to simply claim that this bill will miraculously fix what is broken. And that is our biggest objection to it. The rest around corruption all follows, and the rest around constitutional concerns all follows. But the ultimate one is that if this bill comes into effect, the state will not be able to protect the provisions in Section 27 of the Constitution. And on the issue around the private sector, of course, there was a report, you'll recall, that was commissioned. I can't remember, what was it called, Michelle? It was by the Competition Commission that was commissioned by the department. And effectively, it found some of these issues that you found, that there was overcharging of private patients and private hospitals by medical aid by medical aids. And of course, that is something that the department must deal with, and must deal with heavily. South Africans are barely making ends meet. The fact that there are medical aid schemes that are overcharging certain things that shouldn't be charged at that level should be dealt with. And that's why you've got the Competition Commission. But I ask the question, what has the department done since it commissioned that report? We look forward to the regulation and the stricter regulation of medical aid schemes. That's not something that we are shying away from, because ultimately, again, we are concerned about the hard-working South Africans who can barely make ends meet, who have to get a medical aid because they know they can't rely on the public health system. So absolutely, the department must go and crack hard on unfair business practices by healthcare providers.
Just last check. You are saying that doctors are going to leave, they are going to be stressed, and they're going to be restricted. Where are you getting these things? What informs you of those things? Because it's like they're spreading fear amongst people that it's going to be people that leave, because where is the day getting this idea?
Natasha's question, and then I'll leave. I'll to Jack now. Natasha, on the question of process, I was very much part of that committee for many years, up until about 2 years ago. So when we talk
All right, so we come out of that press briefing. Of course, this is a developing story, hardly a few minutes following the signing into law of the National Health Insurance Bill by President Cyril Ramaphosa. We have spoken already to a few entities that have indicated their intention, of course, to take government to court over the NHI. Of course, what you've been seeing now is the DA reiterating that it is opposed to the NHI bill as it stands in its current form. And in fact, the DA's chief whip, Siviwe Gwahube, there saying that the NHI process is likely to open itself up to corruption and looting, and that Section 27 of the Constitution, which essentially speaks to access to quality healthcare, will not be realized under this particular bill. Of course, the Solidarity as well as the DA now saying that they are taking government to court. We've also spoken to a number of entities that have also indicated their stance and how they will take government to court. Asked if the DA is preempting how the NHI will roll out, of course the DA is saying that is not the case. They're simply looking at the situation on the ground in as far as the healthcare is concerned, as well as the systemic issues in the healthcare infrastructure, and how they possibly cannot see this as a good sign. Of course, we heard from President Cyril Ramaphosa earlier on saying that this is a defining moment for healthcare and that this is, in fact, a milestone for many South Africans. But we'll continue to unpack the meaning of NHI and, of course, how it will be rolled out over the next few years by government.